In true Trek fashion, Deep Space Nine didn't shy away from the weirdness in its stories, particularly when it came to anything involving the Ferengi or the Mirror Universe. At times, the show was a full-blown comedy which gave some needed respite from the heavier storylines that the series is mostly known for. In this list, we'll explore these mind-boggling scenes one by one to see what exactly makes them stand out as Deep Space Nine's most confusingly shocking moments. With that being said, I'm Tom Roberts-Finn, and this is the 10 biggest WTF moments from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Number 10. Kians Death. In the episode The Magnificent Ferengi, Quark's mother, Ishka, was held for ransom by the Dominion, so Quark assembled a team of Ferengi to save her, and also to claim a heavy reward of latinum from Ishka's lover, the Grand Nagus. Originally, the Ferengi planned to take Ishka from the Dominion by force, but holosuite simulations quickly proved that impossible, including one simulation where Ferengi actually killed Ishka accidentally. Certain of defeat, they chose instead to do a prisoner exchange with the Dominion. Starfleet allowed them to return the Vorta Kivan to the Dominion in exchange for Ishka. The Ferengi went to Empok Nor to do the prisoner exchange, but when it was revealed that Quark lied about the true value of the prize money, one of the Ferengi shot Kivan while trying to hit Quark. They thought all was lost until Nog realized that Kivan's dead body could be controlled by a tricorder using neural stimulators aboard the station. The look on the other Vorta's face was absolutely priceless when he saw Kivan for the first time and mumbled, "What have they done to him?" as his lifeless eyes stared blankly forwards and his corpse stumbled down the hall, repeatedly walking straight into a wall. The Dominion's representatives realized that Kivan wasn't alive and tried to kill the Ferengi, but they were able to overpower the Jem'Hadar and captured the other Vorta. The casting of Iggy Pop as the Vorta Yelgran could almost be an entry on its own. Number 9. Jake staying behind. One of the strangest decisions in the show was when Jake Sisko inexplicably chose to stay behind on Deep Space Nine when the station was captured by the Cardassian Dominion Alliance in the episode Call to Arms. Jake was willing to put himself in some serious danger in hopes of becoming a famous reporter. He wagered that the Dominion would not risk angering the Bajorans by harming the son of their emissary. But what could the Bajorans realistically even do to retaliate? Jake's goal was to get a first-hand account on the Dominion occupation. But as soon as he tried sending out his articles, Wei-Yun blocked the transmission and ordered him to censor the anti-Dominion sentiment. Because of course, he would do that. When Jake complained, "What about freedom of the press?" Wei-Yun countered, "Please tell me you're not that naive." Jake was eventually able to publish his first-hand accounts once Starfleet regained control of the station, but didn't know for sure if they would ever return. Jake could have been stuck living under Dominion rule for the rest of his life, all because he wanted to get an insider perspective that he could have easily gotten by interviewing one of the many others that stayed behind on the station. Number 8. The UMO of Your Nightmares. UMOX has been unsettling Star Trek audiences since we first learned what it was in the Next Gen episode Menage a Troi. UMOX is a popular Ferengi sex act that involves the stimulation of a Ferengi's ears, apparently one of their most erogenous zones. UMOX was brought up surprisingly frequently throughout DS9, and it's always uncomfortable to watch. However, one particular UMOX scene stands out as the grossest by far. In the episode The Emperor's New Cloak, an absolutely absurd episode that we'll revisit later, Grand Nagus Zek was kidnapped by the Klingon Cardassian Alliance of the Mirror Universe, who held him for ransom to convince Quark and Rom to steal them a cloaking device. While awaiting their arrival, the Nagus and the imprisoned intendant Kira kept themselves occupied. The scene opened with a zoomed-in shot of Kira rubbing the elderly Ferengi's wrinkled, hair-filled ears. Right after, the cameras cut to Zek's servant Maihadu, who was just standing there watching them. When Zek expressed doubt that Quark and Rom would succeed, Kira grabbed at his ear really hard, causing the Nagus to scream in pain. His servant tried to help him, but Kira quickly kicked him between the legs and threatened Zek before going right back to UMOX and tugging on his ear hairs. I mean, yeah, okay. Number 7. Vic Fontaines Mirrror counterpart. The other huge WTF moment from The Emperor's New Cloak came shortly after Quark and Rom arrived in the Mirror Universe, aboard the Terran-controlled Terok Nor station. An alternate version of Vic Fontaine burst into the cargo bay in the middle of a firefight between Bashir's mirror counterpart. Quark, shocked to see Vic outside the holosuite, said, "You're not a hologram?" To which Vic responded, "A what?" Of course, the Vic Fontaine in the Prime Universe was a holographic singer based on 1960s Las Vegas, and we were never given any explanation as to why his mirror counterpart Dukat was flesh and blood. Seconds later, the Mirror Fontaine was shot and killed by Bashir. Apparently he was some kind of renegade against the Terran Rebellion. Why would a fictional character created by Dr. Bashir's friend exist as a real person in an alternate reality? He couldn't be a hologram turned organic, seeing as he didn't even know what a hologram was. All this makes Vic's appearance in the episode one of the most absurd and unexplainable moments in Star Trek. Number 6. Q's welcoming. After The Next Generation, we assume the common practice for dealing with the Q continuum is to simply play along with whatever scheme they're up to until they get bored or decide humanity has learned its lesson for the day. Sisko, however, had a very different way of dealing with all-powerful alien pranksters. When Q arrived aboard DS9 in Q-less and started wreaking havoc, Sisko confronted him at Quark's bar. Q mocked the commander by transforming the bar into a boxing ring and dancing around trying to provoke him, landing a few punches, which prompted Sisko to knock Q the f*** out. Q never returned to Deep Space Nine in the series, so it's safe to say that Sisko's message came across. This moment really showcased his no-nonsense attitude early in the series and set him aside from Picard, who was probably very pleased reading the report of this incident off camera. Number 5. Dukat's call to Kira. Wrongs Darker Than Death or Night revealed the incredibly dark story of what happened to Major Kira Nerese's mother, Maru. Nerese originally believed that her mother died at a refugee camp on Bajor, but Dukat called the Major in the middle of the night on what would have been Maru's 60th birthday to tell Nerese that she had actually left her father to live with him instead. Desperate to learn the truth, Nerese travelled to the past using the Orb of Time and discovered that Dukat's story was actually true. Her mother was captured by the Cardassians during the occupation to be used as a comfort woman, a sex slave for the high-ranking Cardassians aboard Terok Nor. Maru eventually developed Stockholm Syndrome and defended her captor Dukat because he gave her food and other luxuries that no other Bajorans could hope for. As shocking as this premise was, it could have been much worse. According to Nana Visitor in the documentary What We Left Behind, Ira Stephen Bear originally told her the story would include an affair between Dukat and the Major. Visitor, of course, opposed the idea of having Kira show any sympathy towards Dukat after all he did to her and her people. It was eventually decided that Dukat would have relations with Kira's mother instead, likely because the writers realized that cozying up with the former fascist ruler of her planet would go against everything Kira's character stood for. The episode ended up being much better by setting up another character of Dukat instead. Altogether, it was a nuanced and tragic look at a horrific and often unmentioned element of fascist occupations, and the introduction is probably Dukat's pettiest moment in the whole series. Number 4. Alan Moraine, Count to 4. I'm not going to sing it. Move Along Home is a famously ridiculous episode from DS9's first season. A group of game-obsessed aliens called the Wodai visited the station from the Gamma Quadrant and immediately requested to try out the games at Quark's bar. After they caught Quark trying to rig the Dabo wheel, the Wodai brought in their own board game, Chula. Quark, desperate to make amends with the Wodai, played their game, but he soon learned that the 4 pieces he was playing with controlled 4 people: Kira, Bashir, Dax, and Sisko, who were abducted from the station when the game began. The 4 officers were trapped in a trippy simulated environment that would create different challenges depending on Quark's moves. This could have been a great opportunity to create some really interesting puzzles for these characters, but the first challenge they encountered was nothing more than a game of alien hopscotch. The Alan Moraine rhyme has become a huge meme for good reason, along with the accompanying dance. It's just so The other trials later on in the episode were slightly more engaging, but it's revealed in the end that there was never any actual threat to the players, so the whole thing just seemed kinda pointless in retrospect. Number 3. Rumple Stilskins' visit to the station. Near the beginning of the episode If Wishes Were Horses, Chief O'Brien was telling a bedtime story to his daughter Molly about the fairy tale character Rumpelstiltskin. Moments after O'Brien left her room, Molly came out saying that the Rumpelstiltskin was in her room. O'Brien, expecting this to be a figment of Molly's wild imagination, entered to find she was telling the truth. Sat on her bed was the short, pointy-eared character from her bedtime story, Rumpelstiltskin. Later, a historic baseball player from 200 years ago appeared, along with a duplicate of Jadzia who was madly in love with Julian. It apparently even started to snow on the promenade. It was eventually discovered that alien life forms were creating these figments to study the imaginations of the station's crew. Rumpelstiltskin's appearance in the beginning was a really confusing moment that set the scene for some of the weirder and darker stuff that would happen later. The episode was almost a lot worse. According to the Star Trek Deep Space Nine companion reference book, Rumpelstiltskin was originally written as a leprechaun. Cole Meany objected to this, explaining that using caricatures or cliches of any nation is not not something Star Trek is or should be into. Rumple Stilskin was cringy in this episode, but leprechauns are offensive stereotypes of Irish people, and having an Irish person's imagination create one would have been much worse than what we got. Trek doesn't exactly have the best record when it comes to positive Irish representation, so it's great that Meanie was able to prevent another disaster like Up the Long Ladder. Number 2. The Wrong Riker. Despite 2 former Enterprise crew members, Worf and O'Brien, serving aboard the station, the rest of the Next Generation cast didn't show up in the show often after the pilot. Fans were delighted when Jonathan Frakes showed up in the episode Defiant, but few could have predicted his character's true identity. The Will Riker that arrived at the station was actually his transporter clone, Thomas Riker, from the Next Generation episode Second Chances. When a transporter accident split the two of them, Will continued to live out his life, and Tom was left stranded on an uninhabited planet for 8 years before being saved by the Enterprise D and his counterpart. Thomas Riker came to Deep Space Nine posing as Will and managed to steal the Defiant for the Marquis, which shows how spiteful he grew of Starfleet after his abandonment. The reveal that Will was actually Thomas was really unexpected and turned a cameo that could have just been fan service into a shocking continuation of one of the Next Generation's most iconic stories. Number 1. The Ferengi Incident. In Little Green Men, an accident sent Quark, Rom, Nog and Odo back into the past to the year 1947 aboard a Ferengi shuttle. The shuttle crashed to the planet and the Ferengi awoke in a military base being observed by several soldiers. One of the men remarked that the idiot in Roswell was convinced to issue a retraction, saying that the crashing flying saucer he saw was in fact just a weather balloon. Odo and the Ferengi apparently crashed in Roswell, New Mexico and caused the Roswell incident that the city is now famous for. This was possibly the most discussed alleged UFO sighting in history. Knowing Quark, he'd probably set up a new Quark's Bar franchise restaurant in Roswell to capitalize on his role in the city's history and culture. Odo definitely reported what happened to Starfleet, so now the residents of Roswell finally have an answer to their city's greatest mystery. And that was the 10 biggest WTF moments from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. If you can think of anything else we may have missed, then let us know down in the comments. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to be reminded of future episodes. Also, remember to check out the TrekCulture podcast, which I produce and co-host with our great pal Sean Ferrick. You'll be able to find that on most podcast platforms. You can find us on Twitter at TrekCulture and on Instagram at TrekCultureYT, and you can find myself on Twitter at Tom C. Finn and on other various socials as well. Thank you for watching. Until next time, bye-bye.